I want to welcome all of you to this clinic. It's our first online attempt at doing this, and I'm reasonably excited about it. So let's just dive right in. You know, a really well-executed windy cliff launch is a pretty beautiful thing and one of the more exhilarating moments in hang gliding. Leaving the earth and going up almost instantly is both literally and figuratively uplifting. At most cliff launches, once winds increase to 5 or 10 miles per hour or greater, a crew of launch assistants is a wise decision for any pilot. And learning to launch in stronger winds is not really something to try on your own. To safely launch your glider and to safely help other pilots launch their gliders, you're going to need to understand what is going on in the dynamic environment of the cliff launch. And the main focus of today's clinic is going to be to examine the techniques and procedures used in windy cliff launches, with a particular interest in procedures specific to launching from the Lookout Mountain Flight Park ramp. First, though, we'll discuss some theory, we'll look at some relevant examples, and a quick look at Lookout's paths will lead us back to our main discussion of assisted windy cliff launches from the current Lookout ramp. So let's get started by thinking about exactly what we are trying to accomplish. Okay, I'm going to play this first video just to get us started, and we'll come back to it a little later. But anyway, here we go.
Do they talk to each other? I mean, how do they know not to run into each other when they're up there?
You kind of have to watch.
You'll see.
Oh man.
You'll see how easy it is to get it wrong, even with help. Okay. After we've discussed, a little more proper techniques, we'll come back and we'll re-examine that launch. Okay. All right. So the objective is pretty clear and simple. We want to assist the pilot in safely transitioning from the ramp to the air when conditions rule out self-launch. And a key concept we'll introduce now and come back to later is that the launch belongs 100% to the pilot. Let's look at how and why conditions might disallow self-launching. And to do that, we need to consider the interaction between the two main components of our launch environment, the ground and the air moving over it. Let's look at slope launches versus cliff launches. In looking at the topography of launches, let's first consider a simple slope. In this scenario, the air is an easy path over the ground and can stay relatively smooth. When we look at a cliff, though, the abruptness of the terrain is like a big rock in the stream that disrupts the smooth flow, causing typically rotors. And as the wind velocity increases or as thermal cycles blow through or both, the potential for turbulence increases. Coastal cliffs with strong, steady air blowing across a virtually flat surface of water can have smooth launch conditions where if help is needed, it can be minimal, like one person on the nose, as these historic photos illustrate. At a mountain launch like Lookout, with the air moving over the Earth's terrain rather than the smooth ocean, optimal conditions like this are rare. The exception to this is the elusive wonder wind or evening glass off, which can create relatively smooth launch conditions. The first photo also illustrates the next piece of the puzzle we need to look at: angle of attack and relative wind. Notice in that first photo, the one on the left, that the wing is fully loaded and the nose angle is lower than the horizon, right? See that? Why do wings stall? Not enough airspeed is the most common answer, but not entirely correct. Let's take a quick review of angle of attack. Stalls are directly related to the wind's angle of attack to the relative wind. Lift is produced when the wing passes through the air. More lift is produced as the angle of attack increases. If the angle of attack is too high, the airflow breaks up and the wing stalls. Our angle of attack is actually determined by the air's relative angle to the wind, or what we will call the relative wind. As our glider moves through the air is not always moving perfectly horizontal relative to our wing. In effect, the air itself can alter our angle of attack through its relative flow over our wing. Let's look at how this applies to our different launch scenarios. A slope launch is a fairly laminar flow of air coming up the slope. The wind where you start your launch is pretty much the same as the wind during your launch, which is the same as at the end of your launch when you become airborne. And with many slope launches and the right amount of wind, you can be flying with very little assistance, sometimes with very little forward movement, right? Because that wind is already giving you airspeed. At a cliff launch, the air, depending on the angle of the cliff face and the velocity of the wind, can be vectored almost straight up. The wind goes up more than it comes at you. And the top illustration shows a pilot starting too far back on the cliff. As a result, when the actual airflow is encountered, the angle of attack to the relative wind is just way too high. In the lower illustration, the pilot has moved further into the actual airflow and lowered the angle of attack to compensate for the relative wind's vertical component, producing a smooth launch. We'll see some excellent examples of both situations just a little later. All right, let's take a brief look at the evolution of windy launches here at Lookout. The original ramp at Lookout was basically a cement cliff. As such, it did very little to improve any kind of airflow, right? You can see there was a grate where a noseman would be tied off at the very front edge of the ramp. Pilots flew in much higher winds back then, and controlling the nose angle was of pretty supreme importance. Look at that, we've even got a tandem launch going on the left. Let's take a quick look at a video of a typical launch a little later in time. As the gliders got better, you could soar in less wind, so a noseman was not so critical. And it's obviously a lot safer to just use someone on the keel, right? You can see through it, though, that the wingman and the pilot have to get right out to the edge. All right. It's time to hang 10 out there. How many of you know Tall Paul? That was Tall Paul launching. Those of you who know him.
I do. Flew with him back in the 80s.
Yeah. Okay, so then it's been about 16 years. We built the new improved ramp 2.0, right? As you can see from the side view, the ramp attempts to smooth out the cliff with kind of a pseudo slope launch. Creates a much more laminar airflow over the launch area. Plus the width doubled from 20 to 40 feet, thus affording a much larger, safer platform for pilot, wing, and launch crew. And as mentioned earlier, our goal with the assisted windy launch is to move the glider out into the airflow with the pilot and assistant stabilizing the glider such that at release, the pilot may easily and safely transition from ground handling to flying. And each member of the launch team has a role to play. And so we'll take a look at them in a little more detail. First, we want to talk about kind of the pilot responsibilities. So the pilot is the quarterback of the launch team. It's their launch, so they get to call the shots, right? And it's the pilot's responsibility to choose the members of the team, kind of get them in a huddle for the pilot briefing, and in effect, self-supervise their own launch. While pilots should take as much time as needed to get a safe launch, if it is taking an excessive amount of time and effort to stabilize the glider, backing off and waiting for a smoother cycle of air may be the safer course of action. Our goal is a nice straight launch, level wings, tight harness straps. I want to emphasize this part about our harness main. If you're crouching or bent over under the wing, your main support will be slack. Your weight is your total control over the glider. You want the wing to load up immediately on launch. This is another reason we typically try to quote, feel the air with the wing. It gets the wing loaded and our straps tight so we have immediate control on the word clear, right? The pilot should be clear in their communications to launch crew, both in the briefing and once on launch. And the launch crew should be looking to the pilot for direction, right? Okay, let's think about picking your crew. As a pilot, that's part of your responsibility. So ideally, it's some experienced pilots, right? Rather than just some spectators up there. And hopefully that you know and that they'll be around on a good soarable days. The launch crew will typically be either 2 wingmen alone or 2 wingmen plus a keel spotter. And the pilot will decide which configuration to go with, but generally the stronger the conditions, the more likely wingmen plus a keel spotter is a more prudent way to go. Factors to consider include the level of difficulty in controlling pitch, and of course, the availability of 3 assistants. Lastly, they have to be willing to help, to accept the responsibilities of a launch crew member. As a new pilot, it may be hard to know who to use for your launch crew. As the pilot in command, it is up to you to select and brief your wire crew. Hang around launch, get to know the other pilots, watch them interact with their wire crews, watch how they help other pilots launch, and ask yourself if you trust them enough to help you get safely off launch. If you have to get help from pilots you don't know, use the pilot briefing to make sure everyone understands exactly what is expected of pilot and crew. As mentioned previously, this is not something you learn on your own. As a novice pilot, you should still seek out the help of instructors, and many times they'll be the ones helping you in your initial windy launches as either pilot or crew. Okay, let's think about the briefing now. So the pilot briefing is the opportunity to ensure that each participant in the launch understands their role and responsibilities. In windy conditions, it's probably better to do it before moving up onto the ramp, right? And let them know how you like it. Do you, the level of feedback, constant, only on changes, right? What's your go word? Typically clear, right? How far out on the ramp you want to go, usually the red line, right? So, so a typical briefing might go as follows. Okay, I'd like fairly constant feedback. I'd like to hear up, down, and neutral. I'll center up on the ramp and then we'll walk out slowly. I'd like to go out far enough to load the glider. Wingmen keep me level. I'll manage my pitch, so keelman just be at my rear wires in case we have to back off. My word to launch will be clear. If anyone is uncomfortable, say back off and we'll all back off together. Everyone good? Thanks in advance for your help. Let's move up to the ramp and pick some good air. Okay. Let's think about the responsibilities that the crew, right? Along with the pilot, the wingmen have the most active role in the launch. It's important to understand you're assisting with the pilot's launch. So pay attention to the briefing, right? If you're unclear on something, ask the pilot, right? Wingmen should position themselves behind the glider's side flying wire, close to where the wire connects to the crossbars. Hands should be behind and on top of the side wire. Most pilots will want to get the air out into the airflow and allow the glider to load so the pilot can feel the air. Wingmen need to keep the wings level as they allow the glider to load and give feedback to the pilot. Wingman's feedback should indicate whether their wing is lifting up, neutral, or pushing down, as they keep it balanced. The pilot may have one wing step out or back to adjust the glider's yaw, right? Pilot says clear, you let go, period, right? Clear means clear, okay? The wingman should be okay with calling back off, even though, as we've stated, it is the pilot's launch. If you're uncomfortable with the launch because of, if you're uncomfortable assisting with the launch because of conditions or even the pilot, a safe launch is the goal, and there may be times you have to speak up or unassist yourself, right? As mentioned, at times a pilot may elect to use a keel spotter. The keel spotter might appear to not have much involvement in the launch. However, a spotter does have a specific role and responsibilities. Most pilots will want to, and probably should, manage the glider's pitch on their own. Unless the pilot requests help managing the pitch, the keel spotter should only actually be on the keel when pilot or crew have called back off, or if crew members are losing control of the glider. The spotter usually shouldn't have to do much more than backing up the pilot and wingman. The keel spotter should position themselves where the rear flying wires meet the keel. Hands should be loose around the cables. In stronger conditions, the pilot may have the keel spotter help keep the glider's nose over while waiting for smoother air, or as pilot and crew move out slowly into the airflow. From their spot at the rear of the glider, the keel spotter is in a unique position to see the big picture as the launch proceeds. As a member of the launch crew, the keel spotter can also call back off if they see problems developing. Okay.
Hey guys, I'm gonna interrupt real quick. We're getting some feedback on the audio. So if everyone doesn't mind, please just double check your devices to make sure you're actually muted. That way we're not hearing random audio cutting in and out. Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's think about being on launch, right? Once the crew has been briefed, it's time for the moment of truth, right? A good pilot will have been watching the air during their launch preparations. Take the time to choose the best of the available conditions, right? The pilot should pick up the glider with extra attention to the angle of attack, making sure to control the glider's pitch right from the get-go. And don't be in a hurry to rush to the red line. In windy conditions, the wing is already close to flying. Even a quick walk can add enough airspeed to prompt the wing to accelerate and want to fly off the ramp. Once in position, the pilot will typically want to feel the glider in the air. Listen to the feedback from the crew. Wait for 2 neutrals or 2 ups. On the pilot's clear, the launch crew should release the glider no matter what. Like I said, clear means clear. And the pilot should commit to the launch with a strong push into the air. Remember what your instructors told you your first day training. Run, right? Even though we probably don't have to run much. You want to commit and act like, oh, there's no air here. I really need to run, all right? Okay, so let's come back to this original launch that I showed you. And some of you may be, just from what I've said or from your experience, may note a few things right off the bat that the pilot kind of got wrong here, to put it bluntly. I have to admit, this isn't even that much, this isn't a really super strong conditions in this video, but it does show what can happen. So I'm going to play it again, and we can pause it if we need to. But I think it should be obvious that that nose is a little high, isn't
Do
it?
they talk to each other? I mean, how do they know not to run into
Sure
each
looks
other?
that way to me.
Can I have the
And
watch?
he's way back on the ramp, and ba-boom, right? Luckily, and is in many a case, that pilot was not injured. So it was more of a, ego blow than anything. All right, so let's look at some better launches. On some of these, the wind noise is kind of loud. I'm going to turn the volume down on this one because it's kind of loud. I'll bring it back up for, I think it's the next one where there's a fairly good briefing that we can hear. But one thing to notice right away in all these launches, this is a good example just as it sits here still. Look how high his base tube is off the ramp, right? You can tell that glider is already up kind of in the air. The people who are more vertically challenged, the shorter people, may have never seen their base tube that far off the ground when they launch before. But this is typical, and as we watch this one, we'll see as he walks out, it stays up like that. You can see the pilot's already pretty much fully upright when he goes. Here we go. This is a quick one. Look, you can see him kind of holding, and boom. Into the air and up. Nicely done. Okay, this next one, I'm gonna turn the volume up at first, and then I'll bring it back down once they get up on the ramp because the wind noise gets kind of excessive. See, he's doing this in his hand check. Strong up, wide up, and down and down. When we get all the way to the red line, today's windy. Kind of let them flatter the tone. Not letting you go off early. So don't just, on a day like today, don't hang loose on the wires. I don't mind you hanging on the wires, just don't. Make sure you let go when I say full prop. The other thing is if it just for some reason looks like I can't handle the pitch, I don't mind you helping me, but let me know you're doing it. All right, I will. Okay. That's a really good briefing. I really like that communication with the keel man. I'm going to take the volume down. You can see this is back before the paraglider launch. Once again, you look, you can see that base tube is up off the ramp. The guy is up pretty vertical. They're managing the pitch. Going out slow, step by step. Nice angle of attack there. Clear and good. You got 2 or 3 steps in. Nice. Okay. One more here. This is after the, oh, he's going to do a short brief. Let's see if we can hear it.
Anybody yell back off? It gets crazy. Go back off. Try again. If I'm going to control my pitch, just let me know. If you do anything, if I'm crazy. Yank me off here. They yell back off. All right.
Right, good communication there, telling the crew what he wants to hear. We're going to take her on out slow. All right. Clear means clear. Very nice. Okay. One more, this from a little different angle. We can't really hear much of the briefing, but once again, you can see that glider is already loading. Look how high that base tube is. They need to adjust the pitch some there. Their nose is kind of high. All right, they're going to slowly get out there. And he's right on the edge. And he gets a little yaw on the launch. But by pulling in and making sure he keeps his airspeed up, he's off and away. All right. And there's one more. I had to squeeze one into myself. Wasn't going to let the night go by without showing off. All right. This one is over from the side. See, we kind of cue up on the compass there. Come on out. Got the glider up. I've got a nice angle of attack, if I may say so myself. And boom, 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 in the air. So they're just that easy, right? Okay. So everything I've talked about so far is just meant as a guide to help you understand how a cliff launch works. with an emphasis on the assisted windy cliff launch. And while I focus mostly on how we do things at Lookout Mountain Flight Park, hopefully adapting the concepts presented can help minimize the risks associated with windy cliff launches in a variety of launch situations. And I hope you get to fly at a variety of different sites. Excuse me. Specific sites and the pilots who fly them may have developed additional procedures that help keep the launches safe at their respective sites, right? As always, seek the counsel of the locals at any site before flying. Communication is the key to successful launches. It is ultimately the pilot's responsibility to decide whether to launch or not to launch, who to use on their wires, whether or not the need for a wire crew or keel person exists, and how many wire people they will need, right? When implemented with caution and safety in mind, the windy cliff launch provides the reward of a quick ascent above the ridge and the opportunity to effortlessly merge into the lift band. Remember, we all want to help ourselves and our fellow pilots to get safely into the air. It is each of our responsibility to learn to be the best launch assistants we can be. As a competent pilot, we must understand the windy cliff launch and how to properly manage a wire crew for the best and safest launch possible. So this is kind of the end of the formal part of it. I hope to see you all on the ramp assisting other pilots launch and of course launching yourself. So I'm going to unshare, and if we need to go back to any of these videos, I'm happy to do that. But I will stop sharing and come back.
Hey,
all right.
I'll go first. I just want to say, Gordon, you just did an awesome job. This was really way above my expectations. You nailed it.
Well,
So
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you for this. And I'd like to go back to, the bad launch and, each of us kind of break that down.
Yeah.
For one, and then two, I wanted to come back to the notion you mentioned about, briefing how you like to control pitch. And I'd like to hear like what the other pilots on the call think in terms of how do you like to control pitch? Like, what are the different perspectives on how you like to control pitch? I have my own perspective, but those are the two things I want to do is break down that bad launch and then come back to how you like to control pitch.
Okay, well, I'll probably start with the second part first real quick. In that one longer video where hopefully you could hear some of his briefing to his crew. I really like the way he phrased that, in that you want somebody, if you're going to use a keel guy, you want somebody back there who's going to be watching what's going on and understand that typically the pilot likes to control the pitch so he can feel himself what is actually happening, but know that, if things start to get out of control, that he might have to say back off and help back off, or he might have to, push up on your keel to get your nose down. The important thing is to let him know that's okay to do, but as the pilot said, tell me when you do it, right? And one thing worth noting that I haven't said, or we haven't touched on at all, is, when you've got your helmet on and it's a full face helmet, you got to speak up. You got to be loud enough that the other pilots out there in the wind, and especially the keel man, can hear what you're saying. So don't be afraid to be kind of loud, right, on launch, to make sure that everybody hears what it is. So the idea that, for me anyway, is I want to manage my pitch if I can. If I feel it getting out of control, I want to either let the keel person know, help me out here, or pardon me, or just have them help out, right? But all important, let me know what you're doing. It's just like the side wire guys telling you up and down and neutral. They're letting you know what's going on with the wing. So if you have to make a correction from the keel, really make sure the pilot understands what is happening. Okay. All right.
I noticed your slide said, a light, touch on the keel. And I know I was up there at launch one time, little wind, and, the keel person had like a firm grip on the keel, and I couldn't really feel the wind. And so I said, loosen up on the keel. Now I will say, if maybe a person's doing that on the keel because they feel like my angle of attack is not right, tell me, tell me
Yeah,
my angle of attack
exactly.
is not right. But also, like I need to feel that. So I need to communicate back to them like, hey, loosen up. I can't feel, the wind.
Sure, absolutely. Where they should really be ideally is, where your cable, where your rear flying wires come up and attach to the keel. That's really the best place to be. There've been a few experiences where people will have a stinger in their keel, a thing that can pop out and they can use to prop up the glider when they're setting up. And keel men have grabbed that instead and have it kind of slide out on a bungee, and it's kind of a eye opener anyway. So you really want to be closer to those wires so you can grab there and pull back if you have to. That's the best place to be, but loose, as we said.
I have a keel story. It was on a day with almost no wind, and I was getting ready to launch, and I didn't need any help. I'd been off many times. Somebody that I didn't know hopped up and offered to help. I didn't know them. They grabbed hold of the keel, and when I said clear, they shoved up on the keel. And I was looking at the concrete of the ramp because they had just shoved up on it. Now, had I kept running, I'd have been fine. But I, for some reason, thought I should stop the launch. And of course, you can't stop the launch.
Nope.
And I rolled on off the launch down into the trees.
Okay. It's not a fun experience, but hopefully you learned something from it.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. That's about, like who's helping you? Do you know them? Do they understand? Yeah.
Yeah. Hands off my keel, unless I tell you to.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
out here, we commonly do a lot of windy cliff launches in a variety of conditions, both thermal and coastal, but our most common site is a coastal site. And it's very common to have winds between 25 and 35, right? At 35, it's pretty sporty. But the mentor that we learned from basically is completely opposed to keels because of that exact situation, right? He was very adamant about the fact that if you can't see the person that's helping you, you can't keep track of them. So it was like a nose wire, one side wire, and that's it. But as a result, we have a lot of good techniques for keeping the pitch down in high winds. And a lot of it is that we launch tight hang strap and reverse grip. So instead of holding the down tubes from the front, you kind of reach in from behind like this and push the down tubes back behind you. And that seems to work really well. I'm not sure if it would work on the lookout ramp because it starts off fairly shallow, but ends up really steep. But our cliff launch at Funston and a couple other places is a lot like that. Toll House is also another good example. It's basically a rounded rock face. And so basically, like most people's policy to deal with that is if they can't balance on launch or control the pitch well enough on launch, they don't launch. So like I've had that experience as well where somebody is held on when they weren't supposed to. And I watched I almost blew my launch. I did the opposite. I basically kept running and was able to save it, but somebody held on where they weren't supposed to. And so like, we're very, very wary about having somebody behind you that can potentially touch your glider.
Yeah. And that's a perfect example of, something at a local site. I've flown a number of coastal sites. I've flown Funston quite a bit. And yeah, like those photos I showed earlier, that was West Coast. That was closer down to Santa Barbara at a little coastal site. And the one guy on the nose, that's all you really need. And he says, I'm going left or I'm going right. And you know what he's going to do. And you can get the glider loaded up, and it takes very little effort to launch in those situations. You can go online and find a lot of negative comments about the techniques we use at Lookout. Pilots, I will never let anybody touch my wires, that kind of thing. But these techniques work, and they're proven over years of experience. And, having someone help you doesn't necessarily mean you don't know what you're doing. A lot of times it means you do know what you're doing, right? That you're smart enough to say, hey, I need a little help getting out there. But like I said earlier, in coastal conditions, you know, it's a whole different situation. And that was my point at the end, that when you go somewhere, you know, they may have totally different techniques, and you need to think about, you know, adjusting your technique to meet their protocols, if you will. You know, it's just a lot different in those kinds of conditions, and you can, and I don't want to say get away with, but you can use a lot less help usually, because the air is just that much better, right?
So we had a question from online,
Okay.
and that is, their question was basically, how do you avoid ramp suck? But for people who don't know what ramp suck is, can you explain that a little bit first, and then how do you avoid ramp suck?
Ramp suck is just the wing getting in that airflow and starting to lift. And as it lifts, as I mentioned earlier about walking out really slowly, as it lifts, it wants to accelerate, it wants to go forward, right? We had a much bigger issue with that on the older ramp, which in those pictures I showed was just a big squared off slab, right? The new ramp, Matt picked actually the pulse airfoil to use as the as kind of the curve for the ramp. And I got to say the airflow over it, even on rowdy days, stays pretty smooth, at least on the ramp itself. So the whole issue of ramp suck there is not that big. It's only when you walk out too fast, the glider's already pretty much flying. Just that little extra speed in your walk can give you that extra airspeed where it wants to start flying even more, wants to accelerate and just pull you right off the ramp. So as long as you go out pretty slow, control the pitch, that's usually not an issue. Okay.
So Chewy, I give you an idea how to avoid ramp suck. And that is, this is an old man talking that's gone through a lot of that type of situation. The best way to avoid it is don't fly in high winds where it happens.
That's always
it goes,
advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Gordon, I do have several things I'd like to throw in when it's appropriate.
Please
I don't
do.
know when. Okay. So I don't know how many people on this call have actually had a wire crew at all. Okay. Like, what's your level of experience of wire crew in general at all? I don't know, but there's three things that I always, when I watch new pilots that are going, H2s, H3s, whatever, that are going through this transition with wind. Okay, and Gordon touched on it in terms of know your limits, but there's things that I look for in terms with helping and watching people, and there's three things. Number one is if I really respect a pilot, a newbie that sets up and determines, hey, this is not for me, I'm going to break down on top. Okay, which goes into my second point is, I know back in a long time ago in the 80s when we were all young, this thing called peer pressure. Okay, peer pressure, where I'm, I see him doing it, I'm going to do it. And we talked about a couple of incidences that happened at Tuesday at Lookout. I think one of them might have been a peer pressure situation. And then the third thing that I always, in the back of my mind, I see people that I respect a whole lot is if you see other pilots that are not flying, more experienced pilots, think about why they're not flying. Why don't you ask them why they're not flying? Okay, like there's some reason they're not. And those are kind of three things that I always look for with new pilots, and I respect the pilots that are doing that. Yeah, I know I have a horrible angle here, so I'm not used to this Zoom stuff. So anyway, just want to throw that out, Jordan.
Yeah, no, those are good points. Very good points, actually. I can, if you want, Brian had requested to maybe review that blown launch again. If you want, I can do that if you'd like to. Yeah. All right, and I will get so I can. I'll start it, and then I'll get so I can stop it if I have to. So let's stop right here and look at that nose angle. That's about all you really need to know, to be honest. That and their position on the ramp. And like I said, this is not even that. It's not even that particularly windy that day. It's windy enough where he thought he needed help. Obviously, he needed help. I'm not trying not to be smart ass about it, but what can you say? So I'll play a little more.
Do they talk to each other?
They're
or
going
how do they know
out.
not to run into each other when they're out
And I stopped it again. It's obviously getting ready. Now, the glider is up off the ramp. You can see the base tube's pretty high, but that nose angle, I mean, even if there was no wind, that would be a lousy nose angle, right? How many of you, done your first launches off there, and we tell you over and over, get that nose down, get that, pitch pretty level, right? So even on a calm day, that would be a lousy angle. So it's a little unfair. Oops, sorry, technical difficulties. Here we go again. I'll just let it play this time.
Do they talk
So
to
they
each
go
other,
out a
or
little
how do they
bit.
know not to run into each other when they're out
Boom, right off the bat.
Didn't seem like there was control at any point there.
No, not really, to be honest. We can
Yeah.
come back up. You can see right after, boom, everybody lets go. That guy looked like he was maybe trying to help him do something better, but it certainly didn't work. Once he drags that tip, the other wing is out in the air. So it's gonna, lift and accelerate while the other one is dragged, and it's gonna spin him right around into the rocks there. But you can see right there, right when everything happens, it all just goes off bad.
Seemed
His
like
feet are off the ground. His feet are off the ramp right there. You can see, right?
for me, I kind of boil it three things. It's that pitch. It's that there wasn't any control at any point, and just it was too rushed.
Well, I'll give him I'll maybe take issue with the rush, but yeah, just too much pitch. And even when they go out some, they're starting from too far back on the ramp, right?
Okay. Yeah.
They should be out in it and have that nose over, and that would have been a probably very, very easy launch with that amount of wind. There's not even that much wind that day, all right?
Am I mistaken in thinking that maybe the right wing wire held on just a fraction of a
Yeah,
second too
it
long?
looks, although with him being kind of, out of view, but from behind the wing there, I'm not sure if he was holding or actually maybe even trying to, get the guy, give him some help getting off. It's
Yeah.
hard
He
to
was.
tell.
But it was
Yeah, I
already
know-
starting to go bad
Yeah,
at
it
that
was
point,
already,
right?
it
So
was way.
Yeah.
I know
way
who that
bad.
is, Gordon. I know who that is, and he definitely was not holding on, but sometimes it does look like he was trying
Oh,
to
yeah.
help.
Yeah, you could, if we wanted to get really snarky about it, we could fault the wingmen. If those had been my wingmen, I sure hope they would tell me, hey, man, what are you doing? Get your nose over, right?
Wings not level.
Yeah. Any number of issues with this one right here, right? But yeah, as wingmen, they should speak up if they see something that doesn't seem that right. It could be that they thought, oh, he's gonna, bring the nose down, he's gonna walk on out further. Once he says clear, it's kind of, they're obligated to let go. So you need to, if you have issues or, you have things you think are not right, speak up. I've emphasized several times that it's the pilot's launch, it's their launch, right? But as you can see here, maybe if the wingman had spoken up, it would have actually turned out being a launch rather than an incident into the side of the mountain, right? Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop my share here.
No, Gordon, could you quickly go to that next slide and
Yeah,
just
sure.
where the guy, I just want to make a comment too. So if you look at USPA rules and you try to decide, if you try to look at some guideline, I know I had this on a Tennessee tree topper meeting, I asked this question and we kind of looked at that. Assisted windy cliff launch, are there any guidelines in terms of velocities or gust factors? And there are not. If they're there, I didn't find them. So it's all pilot judgment. So where I'm going with this is that, and I know there's some newbies on here that may have never even done a cliff launch. I would highly challenge you not on your first with the glider flying like that already. I would challenge you, do not try your first assisted windy cliff launch where the glider is already flying this way. I would challenge you to take baby steps where it's a little bit less windy, where you're feeling the glider a little bit more and it's not flying off your shoulders, but you do need maybe a wingman or two, maybe even a kill person. But my personal experience is I wouldn't jump right in and do a cliff launch like this and look out where the glider's already flying. That's just my take on it. I don't know how you feel about that, Gorm, but that's just me.
No, I think that's good advice. Working up into doing a windy cliff launch like this takes some time. You need to fly, we start out in as calm as we can be and then work up into a little more wind, typically your first attempts at soaring are really kind of when the air is marginal. It's a tough time to learn to soar, but you need to just work yourself up into this. It's kind of like going to the ocean for the first time and you stand there and that first wave hits you and you realize, oh, there's a lot of power behind this. And the same with the wind. You have to think of the fact that the wind has volume and mass, right? It's like very thin water, but it's moving and it has mass to it. Yeah, so one like this, I'll go ahead and play this one real quick. It's a guy named John Freitas. I'm going to turn the volume down a little. And you can see he's like almost on his tiptoes already, and then boom. He does very little, it takes very little effort, and he's already in the air, right?
Just to clarify on that last point is I was just wanted to come back on that last point was, so the ratings are based on wind speed, which is going to correlate to whether the glider's, lifting off and so on and so forth. But I think what's also in there that's maybe more nuanced is that you might have a hang 3 or maybe even a hang 4 rating, but you haven't done cliff launches that have a different dynamic. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
because
that's possible. I think if you're up to hang 4, you've probably done some. But yeah, definitely at the intermediate stage is usually when people end up getting into, getting the experience at doing these. Once again, as I said in the presentation, hang out on launch, watch other windy cliff launches, see the ones that work well and see the ones that are a little more challenged, right? Listen to what people do. A lot of times, if it's somebody who's been flying at Lookout a long time and they're using pilots that they've known for a long time for their crew, the briefing a lot of times is super simple. It's, up, down, and neutral. My word is clear. Anybody, doesn't like it, say back off, we'll back off. We'll move out slow to the line. And, it's kind of a standard thing. And if you're working with people that you don't know, you just need to add in the extra stuff and let them know exactly how you want it to be done, where they need to be positioned, what you want to hear from them, whether some people don't like much feedback. Some people just want to feel it all on their own. Other people want a constant kind of stream of consciousness of up, down, neutral, right? It boils down to personal preferences. And like I said, spending some time at launch, observing how it goes with various other people and see what you think, there'll be times when, as a wing person, like in that first one I was saying, the wingman maybe should have stepped in. Despite the fact that I've said numerous times now, it's the pilot's launch, it's their, it's 100% their launch. You need, if we go back to our objective, which is to safely get the pilot off launch, if as the assistant, you don't feel that's going to happen, right, then speak up, say something. And you may have to, say, you know what, I'm just not comfortable helping you do this, and step out of the role you originally accepted. That can make for, maybe a little tenseness on launch, but if you really feel strongly about it, don't be quiet, speak up. And if I can, I'd like to touch on something Mitch was talking about when he talked about peer pressure. This begins to overlap in another clinic I like to do that is about judgment and decision making. The go, no go decision, whether to launch or not launch on a particular day at a particular time, and particular cycle, whatever, the pressure is almost always to go. For a variety of reasons. It can be peer pressure. It can be the fact that, you've been waiting all day for the right cycle. It can be that today is the only day you've got to fly. You've been working hard and you don't have a lot of days off and you're there. And so the pressure, whether it's peer pressure or just typically your own, is frequently, it's more towards the go than the no-go. It's always harder to walk away than it is to say, well, I'll go ahead and see what I can do, right? Although it may be obviously more prudent to make the no-go decision on any particular time. But the pressure is usually there. If there's a choice, it's almost always, leans towards the go position. So it's something to be conscious of. And if people enjoyed this or feel like they got something out of this, I'm going to suggest that we do that try doing the judgment and decision training sometime also, because I think that's a really important one that doesn't get enough attention, so to speak, in our training process as it is.
I got one question that maybe it's more addressed to, I'm sure, the more experienced pilots.
Sure.
But when your wind is a little switchy, say like coming 5-10 degrees off to the right, what more would you do with your wing crew, and especially in your judgment making? And like I say, that's not the H1's concern, or maybe even the H2, but for the people that have flown, how would that affect your decision making?
I just personally, I'm not real fond of crosswind launches. My recommendation is almost always wait for a better cycle. There are going to be days where there aren't better cycles, right? Once again, one of the maybe two most critical things in that situation is keeping the wings level. You don't want one to get up above the other. That and the tight straps and really committing to the launch run, and being prepared possibly for a slight yaw in either direction that the cross is from, whether the right or the left. And being aware of the differential airspeeds that can happen. If one wing gets out a little in front of the other, it's going to be more in the airflow and want to accelerate, right? The other one is almost shadowed a little and isn't out in that flow. And so on launch, that extra air over one wing is going to want to yaw the glider and accelerate that. And in that case, it will probably also want to try to lift that wing, right? Once it starts flying, gets out in the airflow. So now you're in a situation where it's yawing and lifting. You want to be sure that your weight, that you're on there, right? That you're tight to those straps so that you can make the kinds of corrections that will fix that quickly and in a timely fashion, so to speak, right? Any other comments from experienced launchers on that?
We do quite a bit of crosswind launch even at our mountain sites. One thing that is a little unusual that's sort of a local technique is that when we and we will do this with wires where you'll try and balance the glider, and oftentimes actually it's not wings level. It's this very unusual case where it's banked and rolled and yawed based on whatever the wind direction is, and once the glider is balanced, then you go, right? So it's like but in a sense it's like it's level to the airstream, right?
Yes.
So whatever the prevailing wind is, but to a casual observer looking at it, it looks very strange because it's like, might be 10 or 15 degrees yawed or rolled, and then you see that both side wires are evenly taut, and then you'll just go. But as you say, with the wire crew, you have to have very, very clear communication as to that's what you're doing, right? It's like, okay, up is up or down, or put like simple communication is basically how we get that done, right?
Yeah.
So depending on whoever the experience of my wire crew is, it might be like up, down, and when I say down, I just mean put me on the ground. Right. So yeah, that's a common thing.
Would that be more for a smooth laminar flow?
No.
Really?
We
Wow.
do it commonly in thermic conditions as
Wow.
well.
Wow, we'd never do that there at Lookout. We'd absolutely never do that I've seen.
Yeah.
Have you seen that, Gordon? That would be catastrophic at Lookout, I think, depending on the velocity. But have you
Yeah,
ever seen that, Gordon?
depending on the
Yeah.
velocity, I
Velocity
haven't
and strength.
really, I know what he's speaking about, like I was talking about in coastal sites, I've seen that done.
Crestline
Oh,
in
yeah,
Southern California.
yeah, sure, I've flown there a good bit. In fact, Crestline is one of the few sites where I never didn't fly when I went there. It was always horrible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
If anyone gets a chance to go out west and wants to get some good airtime, that's a great spot to just soak it up. I will say that. And real quick, interesting little anecdote. We all have our little flying tales, right? One time about 1,000 feet over at Crestline, I'm kind of out in front and I see a little object in the distance and it's coming right towards me. As it gets up closer and closer towards me, it's a New York Yankees baseball cap. I swear to God, I couldn't believe it. It drifted right on past me and kept going back over the backside of the mountain. Anyway, great place to fly.
I guess anything will fly there.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Yeah.
Mm.
Hey, Gordon, so quick follow-up with that question. So the question earlier was regarding to, crosswind launches, but
Mhm.
in terms of just like mechanical turbulence, I know we have some trees near launch. We have the office where you could cast off some, wind shadows. Like, is there telltale signs we could watch out for those during windy conditions? Or like, is that just like, you just kind of stay there long enough to just know, yep, if I see like that twig move, then something's about to hit me and I shouldn't launch. Like are there things that you could kind of, it's kind of like riptides, right? Like you're standing there, you don't know what you don't know until you get in it. And then like, how do you know, like, are there cues to watch for or things that you should like try to like catch to make sure you know what's about to happen to you on the ramp?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, the minute you show up at launch, you may be anxious to get set up or whatever, but your first thing should really be to start watching conditions right then. Talk to other people who've been up there. What's it been doing? Has it, is it, pardon me, is it building? Is it subsiding? Is it just cycling through? What's going on here? Yeah, if it's crossing from the west, we have an issue with, the building and the trees there. The shop can make a wind shadow. So that can be pretty tricky. I would think if it's crossing, what is that, more from the north, now with the new paraglider ramp and there's nothing there, that may be a little less of an issue. I think from the west, it'll still be an issue because of the buildings and stuff. But if it's crossing that much that it's creating those kinds of issues, then it's probably not a good day to launch anyway. You really do want it as straight as possible whenever you can. And hopefully on these really windy, typically on the days we're talking about, these assisted windy cliff launches, it's usually a pretty good direction. If it was that strong as we saw in some of those better launches and coming from the left or the right, it'd be a different story, And once again, I don't know what the new paraglider launch, with that all being clear, what difference that'll make as far as launching, with a little more north component. But yeah, west launches can be very, west cross there can be very tricky. Once again, as we've mentioned, and as our folks from other sites have mentioned, you need to pay attention to the locals. You need to see, and as in Mitch's point, really good point, was, if the people that you consider experienced aren't launching, maybe there's a reason, maybe there's a reason. They're not just old and lazy, but they think that, these really aren't the best conditions for what we want to do. Okay.
Yep,
Gordon,
I've
really-
flown when
yeah, go ahead.
all the old guys were on the ground and I regretted it
Yeah.
deeply.
You find out why they're on the ground.
Well,
quickly.
yeah, my teacher actually said, well, did you learn something?
Yeah, exactly.
So, from my experience, there was a question earlier. If the switch conditions at the ramp and you stand in there with wire crew, if you can't balance a glider, you probably shouldn't fly it. It's probably like trash air anyway. And at lookout, often you have to wait till like an hour or two till like 4 o'clock. It gets smooth and like constant, and then it's easy to launch and it's pleasant to fly. So that's a thing. And also, wire crew, I could never blame a wire crew. If you can pick a wire crew, the most experienced pilots, but it's really hard to make sure they all on the same page with you. Like 3 people all aligned doing the same thing is hardly going to happen ever, like 100%. So in my opinion, it's 90% you who feel the wing and 10% of the wire crew who kind of like help you not to, hold your wing there just in case of the gust or something like that.
Yeah.
If it makes sense.
Yeah, no, it did. Hey, Tommy Thompson, did you have a question?
Okay. I'd like to make a statement. And everybody's right on the tip of the iceberg as far as all of this, but there's something inside each individual that makes us different as whatever human beings and hang glider pilots. And I noticed that it's not all about the conditions, not all about the experience. It's how you feel that day. A lot of times I decide not to go to launch because of what I see happening in front of me. We used to call them in the early days wind dummies. So it's, observation of the conditions and, are there gusts and how constant wind is, thermal cycles, all of this is very technical. But when and watching the windsock and crosswinds and everything, but when you watch 2 or 3 pilots go off in front of you, it either encourages me to get ready to go or discourages me.
Yeah, good point.
And I've had more than one pilot, I've done it myself too, being the first guy up, fly over launch and yell, "Why don't y'all wait a little bit?"
You just want the air to yourself.
Well, yeah, that sounds good. But what
Yeah.
I'm saying is, as an experienced pilot, I know some of the lesser experienced and more student beginner people that are not going to like it if I don't like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'm giving them a heads up and a warning. And I love it when 2 or 3 other people fly off before me and yell, "Come on up, it's great,"
Yep.
So we're talking about the mental aspect of hang gliding too. See, tonight we've been talking a lot about the physical. You know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I can just say that what you're getting at is what I discuss a lot more in depth in this judgment training and decision training clinic.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's a lot more about attitude.
And the way we encourage each other, the way we talk to each other, the camaraderie and showing a care for each other and everybody's safety, that it really is good for your soul, your mental part of all of this.
Absolutely.
Because I make it a point to try to be on every launch at our club, no matter what. Just to make sure everybody is kind of like getting the best attention or care. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
A big thing that somebody as a wire crew needs to also do. We had this happen last year on our club site. You assume every pilot does a good pre-flight? Don't assume that.
Yeah.
Don't assume that he's done a thing. Matter of fact, I always make sure you're in both straps, your beaner's locked, your straps are straight, your parachute pins are in. I can visually see that as one of the wire guys. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And we hang check.
Yeah.
So all of this is a good mental thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. So as an instructor, you get used to doing that on launch, watching not just the hang check, but looking at the backup and the main and the carabiner. And there's no reason wingmen or other pilots can't do the same thing. In fact,
Yes.
we encourage everybody. Like I said before, if you see something, even if you think the other person is more experienced or whatever, say something, right?
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
they do something a different way and it's actually okay, but if it doesn't look right,
Well, we're not a race car pit crew. We don't have to use hand signals. We need to verbally say stuff,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Hey, somebody in the chat asked if I could mention that I keep talking about cycles and wants to know something about those. Typically, we're talking about thermal cycles. The air will, maybe it's a constant 10 or so, and then every now and then it picks up to 15 or 20, blows that way for a few minutes, and then subsides back down to a steady 10 or so. And a lot of times, if you're observant enough, you can even time these cycles and get an idea of when they start and when they end, that kind of thing, so that you can be prepared and maybe launch right at the beginning of a cycle and have that good, stronger air to make sure you get up in the lift. Or at our ramp in particular, that whole area is kind of a thermal producer, and they will wick right up into the ramp and right through. So the cycles we're talking about, you'll hear some people discount this, that say, oh, don't really believe in cycles. But if you're out there and you're paying attention, I think you'll observe that they come and go. The wind will, pick up and increase and be that way for a bit, be a little gustier for a bit, and then kind of subside back down to a more natural level. And, some people like to launch in those stronger conditions. Some other people have a preference. They'll say, no, I'm going to wait till it lays down a little, right? And we get it, it's a little easier to do. Once again, that kind of boils down to personal preference and personal experience, right? You want to work up to those stronger launches if you're interested in launching in that kind of air.
So Gordon, I think you've done a really good job, and you mentioned this session about judgment or whatever you were calling that.
Yeah.
I'd love to see you do that. And there's another one I'd like for somehow to put together. A lot of new pilots can get a lot of airtime real easy with just ridge soarable conditions, just going back and forth on the ridge. Okay. And it's an easy way to do it, but I would challenge, I just got this question asked yesterday by almost an H3 guy. He just did his final H3 yesterday. And he says, how do you thermal? What do you do? All right. And I mean, it's a valid question. And
Yeah, sure.
and a lot of pilots, I think will be a good session for you, maybe if you're interested, to put together about thermal techniques. And because to me, I'm an older guy now. I hate ridge soaring. I hate all the high winds. To me, the most beautiful thing about flying a hang glider is launching off in light wind, going out and finding a thermal and getting high. That is absolutely the beauty of this sport, in my opinion.
I'm a little more broader interest. I've done enough coastal soaring that I really like that. In fact, I kind of like that more than ridge soaring at Lookout. I like having the ocean spread out in front of me. One thing that was always fun at Fort Funston when I was much younger and, traveling around in my van with my dog and the hang glider on top, you'd be up and you'd flying along and you look out and there's the Pacific Ocean is beautiful. And you look over to the other side and there's San Francisco, man. And you just, it's a great feeling. I love that coastal stuff. Either there or Southern California, or even up in Michigan, there's some great coastal soaring up there at the right time of year.
Well, if you ever want to come out, we'll be happy to host you.
Yeah, great. I could use a refresher out there.
That's the dream.
We have 6 sites within an hour drive.
Yeah. Hey, just in passing, do you fly Mount Diablo?
I'm qualified to. We took the orientation. We've got a bunch of people coming up on Monday or tomorrow to go fly. I'm probably going to go up the next opportunity.
Cool.
Unfortunately, I have obligations tomorrow. So,
Oh,
but yes, we do fly Mount Diablo. Yes.
Yeah. Excellent.
But my personal favorite local site is Mission.
Oh, okay. That's one I've never flown before.
Come on out.
Yeah, I would love to.
Awesome job, Gordon.
Thank
I'm
you.
thrilled to be a part of this inaugural, Zoom webinar. Great job.
Yeah. So I really appreciate everybody coming in. This is my first attempt at doing something like this over Zoom. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I think it went pretty well. I hope everybody got something out of it. And if there are any other questions, anybody else wants to stay on, I'm more than happy to keep talking. Okay.
Thanks
Thank
to
you
the
very much.
experienced pilots that shared
Thank
their
you.
stories too. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for everybody at every level. It never hurts to get input.
Really nice this webinar.
Yeah.
I am Raul from Ecuador, and I live in the Andes Mountains. And we take off here at 12,000 feet, and we land at 9,000 feet. According to
You guys must be good runners.
Yeah, we have to be good runners. The wind, the air pressure is really low, so we have to run a lot. And everybody is welcome to come to fly here. We have places to fly over the capital and land in an old international airport. It's not working anymore. And we also fly we have a coastal flying place. Probably you have heard about Canoa. And well, we all the year around we fly here. If we don't fly in the mountains, we fly on the beach.
All right. Now, is Ecuador, is that where you're dialing in from too?
Yes, Ecuador.
Oh, wow. We have an international presentation going on here. It's terrific. All right.
Yeah, and one of the funniest things here is that 25 miles away from the city, from the capital, there is the middle of the world monument. So we crossed from the south hemisphere to the north hemisphere.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can fly over this monument, and we make a 360 around the monument. And that means that in a 360, you fly in a hang glider around the world.
That's great. Love it. Love it. Hey, well, you're welcome to come fly with us too. We'd love to see you at Lookout sometime. All right.
Thank you. I've been
Yeah,
a
thank
couple
you.
of times here in United States, flying in some places in Florida and San Diego,
Yeah.
and different places in Arizona.
Excellent. Excellent. That's terrific. Thanks for dialing in and being a part of this tonight. Really appreciate that.
Thank you everybody for joining, and thank you, Gordon, for doing the first Southeast Fledglings seminar. And we look forward to doing more. So if you have any ideas of topics you guys would like to see, or things you want to see discussed, or anything like that, feel free to let us know. We'll try to find some experts in the group and see if we get some presentations set up. So thank you.
Yeah, and hey, a big thank you to Chewy too for instigating this. He was the first one to get in touch with me and say, hey, how about doing it? So a big thank you to him for getting this organized and putting the word out there. I'm not on a lot of social media, and luckily we have people who are, like Chewy, and I really appreciate his drumming up a lot of support for this. Terrific job. Thank you guys and gals.